Ladies and gentlemen, this is stage 5 of Zwift Games 2025. I'm bringing you this video a little later than I was expecting. It is almost 2 weeks since the Zwift Games 2025 ended, but there was a lot of things to do. I was riding my 100-miler outside and there was the new patch, so I was pretty busy. This is a very long and very difficult course, so to avoid this video being way too long, I'm going to try a new thing. I'm going to skip around the boring parts and bring you only to interesting sections. And we are going to jump right into the first difficult part of this course, and it is the climb on the Jarvis Island. This course is about 45 kilometers long and has almost 900 vertical meters, spread around 6 climbs, each of them being more difficult than the one before. So the first one is this climb in the Jarvis Island, the second one is the very first section of the epic KOM reverse. Then there is the very difficult section of 3 climbs back to back to back. The first one is the Mayan Mountainside KOM, the second one is the Itza KOM, and the third one is the second portion of the Great Climb. To finish things off, there is the final challenge in the shape of epic KOM reverse. So there is definitely plenty of challenge in this race, and now we are approaching the summit of the first one. I didn't expect anything major to happen here, but to be sure, I tried to stay in the front of the group so I could react if there was any unexpected increase in pace. Thankfully, nothing crazy happened and we could tick off the first climb of the day as done. So for the most part, the first climb of the day didn't break the group. There were some people who dropped, but there weren't that many, and here we are approaching the S's, on which I tried to do a move on my own. When this dirt section started, I was watching the numbers of other riders and noticed that they weren't that high. And what I really didn't want to happen is for the good climbers in the group to arrive at the bigger climbs of the day fresh. I expected they would simply then nuke the power and I would be left in the dust, so I took the matters into my own hands, or legs to be more specific, and started increasing the power here. I didn't expect to drop the group, not by a long shot, but I still thought that if we put a little bit of sting into their legs, maybe a little bit more that they would like, they wouldn't go as hard when the real climbs actually arrived. Whether or not this is going to be effective is remain to be seen, but it is clear that it forced the group to actually increase the power quite a bit, so at this point I was fairly happy with this move. And the first challenge actually wasn't that far off, and this is the first part when I expect some riders to drop off the group. This is the bottom part of the epic KOM reverse, and it's got 2 parts. This is the first one, the steep one, where the gradients go over 8%, sometimes even over 10%. This steep part is about 700 meters long and you really need to push hard to stay with the front of the group. But when it finishes, you actually cannot rest because there is the second part, the bridge, and that is ever so slightly uphill. It's probably 3-4%, and you still need to push to continue. So obviously my goal here was to compete with the front group. I had my featherweight ready to use if anything was going in wrong direction, but ideally obviously I wanted to keep that either for the grade or for some hard part on the epic KOM. And so far so good. It's not easy effort by any means, but I still feel kind of comfortable holding the front of the group, and it doesn't look like that there would be a risk of me getting dropped, at least for now. This turn right here is the most difficult part of this climb. It's got gradients over 12%, and since I managed to survive that, I know that I can also successfully tick off this climb. And like I predicted, this climb actually dropped some people, but there is still about 16, 17, 18 maybe people in this group, and we are continuing still on the uphill sections towards the jungle. So we are now climbing for about 5 minutes in a row, and it is getting quite tiring, And obviously there were people that tried to exploit that, quite understandably so, and it is the lady or the gentleman in the pink, and I feel that this attack is meant seriously. It is not at ease, and although I was hurting, I was still very much in control, so I decided I would not cave to this attack. I waited for a few seconds if there is going to be someone who reacts to this attack, but then I decided to chase it myself, so I ramped up the power to over 6 watts per kilo and started chasing. And although these efforts are hard, they are always very hard, I felt incredible that I was in control at this level, that I could chase and attack myself. Frankly speaking, after the stage 4 in London, I was terrified that this hardest stage would be a complete disaster, and I was very glad to see that this doesn't look like is the case, at least at this point. There were 2 other guys who were chasing this attack with me, but honestly I didn't feel like this breakaway could be successful, especially since we are now approaching a long downhill section on which it is very likely that the bigger group is going to catch up. And that was actually the case, so we are moving forward to the start of Mayan Mountainside KOM, and I was quite afraid of this section of the race, actually more than the Epic KOM. For some reason, I'm really not a fan of these 2 climbs, Mayan and Itza. Historically, I've never done really well on them, and especially since there is the great tucked at the end of both after basically very short recovery, it's quite scary to me. And this is an image that I'm actually quite used to this season. People at the front attacking, group chasing them, and I'm in the back trying to hold for several more seconds. This time, however, it was more than just few seconds, and I was still holding onto the group, although at this point it actually looks like I might get dropped after all, but right at the moment when it looks like I might be done, the road flattens for a little bit, allowed me to catch up to the group, and I'm still in the game. And compared to the previous races, I sort of refused to concede that this would be the end of this race for me, so I really pushed down the power, and it looks like I will be able to finish this in a group. I'm not saying the front group, but in a group. It looks like there are riders who are going to be able to break away, but still I'm with some riders, so that I consider a success. Here is a little bit of a rest, and I live to fight another day. But not only that, right here it looked like the front might actually break away from the front, and I actually wasn't happy with that either, so I decided to push down the power one more time, because since I was able to get with them here, I might as well continue in the coming kilometers, because the gradients aren't that crazy. So I'm chasing, and I'm back at the front. And as you can see, there are attacks here and there. There is still someone who tries to test the group if there is going to be breakaway, but this is the rolling section. It's very easy to actually stay with the group here, because if there is a punchy climb, there is going to be somewhat longer descent after that. So I'm not overly concerned, but it is the finish of this climb that historically always made me to break, because the longer this climb gets, the harder it is. And I'm not saying that this climb is difficult, it isn't in its own, but since it is tucked onto another climb that was also somewhat difficult, it gets tiring really fast, and historically it didn't bode well with me, but this time something feels different. So this is the start of the final portion of this climb, and I still don't feel the need to use the featherweight. But here starts the section with which I've always historically had the biggest trouble with. This intersection of the normal pavement and the cobblestones, or whatever you want to call it, maybe panels. And I need to be honest, the pace obviously isn't that crazy as it would be if this was probably the last climb of the day. It looks like that the guys around me appreciate what's coming after that, which is the grade after very short rest actually. And this is one of the moments where I regret that I'm not using sauce for Zwift anymore. I would like to see the heart rate of the guys around me, because although I was still in the front, my heart rate was approaching 180. And I would kind of like to see if that was the case for the other guys as well, or if from them it was sort of a controlled effort before the harder one that's coming up. And this is the hardest section right here. You can also see that on the chart with the dark red marking. And I don't like it anymore, but at the same time, the summit of this climb is so close that I would probably rather drop dead than to give up at this point. I didn't feel low on energy in this race. I was eating quite well. Before the start of the race, I had a pre-workout gel and I had the first energy gel before this set of 3 climbs, and I would have another gel right before the epic KOM, but it was the sustained hard effort that was really draining my power. But the climb is now done. I'm still in the front and I have about 1 minute of rest before the grade starts. And boy did I not rest well. I arrived at the bottom with 165 BPM, and when I saw race begin in the chat, I knew I was done. I knew I wouldn't be able to stay with those guys, because apparently it looks like they were just pacing themselves on the previous climbs, and only now the real competition has started. And what followed was a scenario that I am quite used to this season. I tried to hang about 3 meters behind the group for a little more while, but very soon it was clear to me that the racing at the front in this race is over for me. But only at the front. I'm still on the 10th or 11th spot, which is quite good, and before this race I would actually be super happy with this if I ended 10th or 11th. So since I was riding by myself, I tried to pace myself in sort of time trialing mode, and you can see on my face that I'm quite tired, but I was holding about 3.5, 3.6 watts per kilo on the great ascent, and although this hurt, I knew there was a long descent coming and I intended to rest before the final challenge of the day. So this is already the middle part of the descent, and I'm actually going to overtake a guy in front of me. Not that it matters in the grand scheme of things, but it is nice to see that the guys in front of me who did way better than me on the climb can also get tired. So I have recovered, I had a drink, I had a gel, and here is the start of the final challenge of the day, the epic KOM reverse. It's not the full ascent, the early part with the bridge and the switchbacks before the bridge are missing, but it is still almost 5 kilometers and about 350 vertical meters, so plenty of work to be done. I'm currently on the 10th spot, but for some time already it looks like that the guy that I passed during the descent is going to pass me back on the climb. He's now 7 meters behind me, he's drafting whatever draft effect he can get off me, and I'm not overly bothered about him, because for someone like me, a climb like this is always a battle within. When you are not a climber, you are not aiming to beat other riders, but you are trying to beat yourself, to do as well as possible with whatever hand you have available at that very moment. And here is the moment when he said, okay, fun time's over, I've had enough recovery, and he's going. And I'm not even attempting to follow, because I knew that would be a lost battle. I'm still focusing to produce as much power as I can for the duration that I expect, that is until the end, which at this point is probably half an hour. I know that on the course map it looks like almost a finish, but it's still about 4 kilometers with very steep gradients, so it is going to take some time. Moving a little bit forward again, there was a guy in front of me who quit actually, so I moved to the 9th place in the race, and I decided that it is how it's gonna stay, because top 10 in a Queen stage of Zwift Games would be an excellent finish to a mediocre season for me. At this point there were basically 2 guys behind me who were in the contention of taking this from me. At this point there were about 70 seconds behind me, and they were actually reducing the gap. So I increase the pace a little bit because I really wanted this season to end in a high note. And I actually managed to do that. 9th place in a difficult race like this is something I'm very happy about. I now consider the Zwift racing season to be over. I'm still going to race during spring and summer, but I will also more focus on structured training, so the next season is a real success, and so I can probably finally join the A ranks like I wanted already this season, but I've had a lot of setbacks. This is probably somewhat unnecessary celebration, but at this point I'm ecstatic that I was able to do this, and I want to thank you guys for staying with me this season. If you like my content, don't forget to subscribe because there's way more coming, both related to Zwift and even outside riding. These are my final stats from this race, and I'm going to see you in the next one.